Kurt Blades tracks tractors. And while the sales of many of the categories have been falling for months, he does not think the sky is falling. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and welcome to the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Kurt is a senior vice president with the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. He sees the numbers every month that show what is selling and what is not selling in the tractor business, tractors both big and small. He'll share some insights coming up on what is causing changes on both fronts and why he thinks some of the headlines you read these days could be a little misleading. But first, we want to get personal. It just so happens that Kurt lives a couple of streets away from me in central Iowa, and we both happen to be proud graduates of the University of Missouri-Columbia. Now, the years before Kurt became a Missouri Tiger shaped his thoughts about farming. Hey, let's start in Shelbina. I know that turf a little bit because you and I are both Mizzou grads, but tell me a little bit about growing up on the farm in Shelbina and kind of how that kind of shapes who you are.
Well, I'm a farm kid from Northeast Missouri. Shelbina is what I claim is my hometown. Monroe County is actually where our farm is. And, you know, with multi-generation, in fact, we just celebrated our 100th year of farming the same land, which has been pretty fun. But, you know, as every farm kid can tell you, that experience of growing up on the farm, it's part of your soul. It's part of who you are. And that absolutely shapes everything that I do, from, you know, the conversations that I have with folks in the machinery industry, the ag equipment industry, or, you know, executives and politicians. That is part of who you are as a farm kid. But what that also brings you is that passion and understanding of rural life in rural America. And that is, that kind of that's driven my entire career. That's forced me to make some choices in my life that help to advance this industry and advance agriculture, which is pretty fun.
So what'd you have on the farm growing up?
You know, we're 7 generations right now, corn, soybean. Right now, when I was growing up, it was corn, soybean, wheat, and cattle. Growing up, I spent a lot of time, you know, driving tractors and raising cattle and doing all the things that a good farm kid does. You know, now it's my brother-in-law is running the farm, and his son, my father has since retired a little bit, and I try to make it back there every once in a while. We're actually harvesting corn today, so those are good things. In Missouri is a little ahead of things, but it's a beautiful crop being grown this year. Unfortunately, it's not the prices that we'd like for it to be, but nothing puts a smile on a farmer's face than like a good crop.
Speaking of those prices, so as we're talking to you, the USDA has just modified its original income projection. So not as dire as what we had heard earlier in the year. So earlier in the year, it was supposed to be down this year about 25% or so compared to last year. Now they're saying maybe it'll be somewhere a little south of 7%. So not great, obviously, but not nearly as bad. And I'm curious if that changes maybe how you're looking at these last couple of months. You look at all kinds of trends. So what does that mean to you?
Well, I think, first of all, agriculture in the United States is big. And, you know, we're sitting here, you and I are both sitting here in Des Moines, Iowa, and we look and we see corn, soybean, we think row crop farming. But in other parts of the area where they don't do row crop, I mean, specialty crops are about as hot as they could possibly be. There are pockets where livestock is particularly good. You know, dairy has its set of challenges right now. So there's different parts of agriculture are doing quite good. So when USDA adjusts its overall income adjustment, that includes sort of on average. So I'm thrilled to see that it's you know, they adjusted it upward. I still don't like the fact that it's, you know, a lower projection, but I think all of us that are involved in agriculture, you know that there are storm clouds that we're dealing with, some very real storm clouds. Whether that's, you know, first of all, lack of a farm bill, that creates uncertainty, but you've got input prices that are still dealing with a little bit of a hangover from the pandemic, where you got fertility prices are just crazy, and they have been for a while because of some supply issues, and the demand is certainly there. We've got, you know, crop input prices continue to be inching up there. That puts a lot of pressure on the farm income. Not to mention the fact that the commodity prices are just not there. And it's whether that's because of uncertainties in biofuels, because of that global economic issues or global trade issues, those all kind of figure into the dynamics as agriculture. And so when you look at those early projections of being down 20%, that was certainly baked into it. To see those adjustment up, it's probably because some of those pockets are performing a little bit better than maybe others were. But the reality is it's a little tough out there in farm country.
So you, with the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, you watch so many things on various levels here. Let's start with what part of the industry is struggling right now? Because we've seen layoffs for a variety of reasons, and those kind of get the big headlines, and we're kind of, all right, what's behind it? What does it mean? Are they gone forever? Are they coming back? What are you seeing?
Well, the real story with equipment manufacturing is, tractors and combines are fun. They're fun to talk about. They're fun for farmers to buy. They're fun to drive. Everything about them is awesome. That's what farmers love. And they love to buy capital equipment. However, that stuff is also, it gets expensive.
Sure.
So you don't wake up tomorrow and decide that you're going to buy a combine. That's a considered purchase. You have to feel really good about the future of your farming operation to make that investment. So those investments are being questioned just a little bit. But as you think about the entire supply chain of farm equipment, and this is where you look at some of those headlines that have been gathered about manufacturer maybe making some reductions in the supply or slowing down the supply to more appropriately match the demand. What we want to make sure is that the supply and the demand are as closely aligned as they possibly can. Because in the equipment market, obviously, I love talking about new machines because that's the association that I represent. But a very important part of that whole economy is the used equipment market. And the last thing we want is to flood a dealer lot with machines that can't be sold, because that puts a lot of pressure in the small town, that puts a lot of pressure on the dealer, maybe some margin pressure, other things like that. But that also deflates the value of the farmland or the machines that are in a farming's operation. That affects their balance sheet, that affects their ability to get capital, all these types of things. So it's really important that supply match the demand. And I think manufacturers learned some pretty valuable lessons about 15 years ago when we had a huge run up on commodity prices, and then the market kind of fell out, where we were stuck with a lot of excess inventory out there. I think manufacturers have been really cautious to not oversupply the market. And that's why you've seen these adjustments that have been happening. Those are the kind of things that we try to share, and we have these conversations with our members all the time, just to make sure that they are doing the responsible thing for the industry and for all of agriculture.
I don't know if this is a fair question or not to really put you on the spot, but let's say when things were cooking, my 14-year-old says apparently that's a hot word right now, cooking. Okay. So when things were really cooking, let's say 21 and 22, kind of we get hammered with COVID. 21, 22, we got a lot of money coming in, especially from the government, and then this pent up demand. In your opinion, in your analysis of everything that's happening here, did some of these manufacturers kind of go gangbusters because there was so much cash available, and now it's kind of a natural pullback? And I guess my question is, how much do we freak out when we see these headlines about layoffs here, layoffs here? Like, is it just kind of an adjustment to maybe what it was more like pre-2021?
Well, I would say it's a mixture of things. First of all, during the pandemic, tractors sold really, really well, specifically small tractors and mid-sized tractors, largely to suburban landowners. They were, folks that have a larger acreage weren't able to take their trip to Europe that they take every year because of COVID shutdown. So they had money to spend and they wanted to make the property prettier. So they bought a bunch of tractors, and small tractors sold a ton of small tractors. That had a ripple effect on a lot of things. At the same time, there were some real serious labor shortages that were beginning to happen at that same time. So a lot of the manufacturers did sort of ramp up and hire the best they could to take advantage of that. And so I think to answer your question in a very short answer, the headlines that we're reading about right now are cyclical. That's the best way to say it. We've seen we've seen this game before. It's like maybe you over adjusted with the hiring and you have to get a little bit more right sized. That's probably what is a better way to say it than I'm not panicked, and I don't think our members are panicked at this point. I think it's really just making sure that we're being responsible with the employee base, being responsible with the supply, because this will turn around. Agriculture and people have got to continue to eat. So the market continues to be strong, even though it's going to be might be a little painful for the next 18, 20 months.
You talked about how you really have to consider when you're looking at one of these bigger purchases, but at some point you have no choice, right? Like you got to replace, so you can only put it off for so long. So how does that come into play?
That's the story that if you ask a farmer, how long will this tractor last? And the answer is one more year, typically.
Yeah.
But at some point, you do have to replace it.
Yeah.
And it kind of depends on how a farm is set up. There are farms that are set up to have new pieces of machine in rotation for every few years. And that being the case, that's how they're set up. That's how they're capitalized. That allows for their uptime. That's how they're maximizing their efficiency. There are other farms that like to stretch that out a little bit further, and they plan that into their equipment, fleet operations, where maybe they do have a mixture of more maintenance is built into it. And then there's other farmers, my father-in-law being a perfect example, that he's going to get every ounce of value out of that machine if that's 30, 40, 50 years worth of value out of it. So all of these things the answer is all of these things can happen. But as we look at, certainly the weather uncertainty that we deal with here in, at an increasing rate here in the Midwest, and you look at that, just to be able to be competitive on a price standpoint, that operational efficiency matters so much. So because that operational efficiency matters so much, the uptime matters so much. That's why you're seeing, those farmers that are really focused on operational efficiency tend to buy new machines on a pretty frequent basis. And that being the case, that's what we're looking at, is that replacement market for that. They may slow it down just a little bit because of economic uncertainty, but at some point you do have to replace the machine.
So how do we know, as friends and neighbors, watching out for friends and neighbors who may have been in the business, how do we know whether some of these labor adjustments aren't permanent, and that some of these things aren't going to be transitioned to Mexico, and that's the last we're ever going to see of them, and it's just going to be this slow one after another moving out of the country?
Well, I think the economic climate of North America specifically is very much, recognizing that we are in a global supply chain. We've been in a global supply chain for a very long time. I think the pendulum probably swing a little bit too far, and that the pandemic exposed that bringing things a little bit closer to your shore is a good thing. Shoring up that supply chain is a good thing. So that's, I think, what we're really seeing happening right now. You're seeing investments. I mean, all the manufacturers that have made headlines for reductions in staff were also making headlines months ago for major investments in production in the United States. So those are two sides of the same coin. It's not so much a trade-off of one or the other. The answer is both. I think there will continue to be a lot of investment in manufacturing here in the United States. That's certainly where the trend is. That's where all the incentives are. That's where the innovation is. And it kind of needs to be there. If you look at some of the global uncertainty that we're dealing with, some of the areas of the world where we've relied on a little bit more for production, not necessarily for ag equipment, but for production of stuff in general, not as friendly as it used to be. And so there's a lot of folks who are really taking a good hard look about where they're sourcing their goods from. Equipment manufacturers are right in that same boat, bringing things closer to the manufacturing. A lot of that means that's bringing it right here to North America. That's a pretty good thing.
I don't want this next one to sound insensitive, because I have a friend who was one of these folks who had been laid off. So I don't want this to come insensitive, but from your standpoint, then, do you pay more attention, which may not be phrased correctly, but do you pay more attention to companies making that financial investment in stuff, in facilities. And I'm not saying that investing in employees is not important, but I'm talking about if a company has determined to build a facility in the United States, expand one, bring on a new line, new product, whatever, does that say more about where they think things are going rather than the kind of up and down adjustments and readjustments in labor force? Does that make sense?
I get what you're saying, and I appreciate your bringing up the sensitivity issue as well, because obviously it's very easy for me to speak to this as if, you know, gainfully employed, I haven't been directly affected by those layoffs. Those are real tough decisions that the companies make when they make a reduction in force. My heart goes out to anyone that's been affected by that. But having said that, I do believe that certainly sitting here in the Midwest and those companies that are involved in agriculture, they do take that contract with employees very sacred, and are gut wrenched by decisions of reduction in force. And I think that's part of why these investments are being made in the United States, because they want to make sure that they're building a long-term business, a long-term plan for good, stable jobs, good, stable careers that folks can have. And unfortunately, there are cycles, and sometimes people do get caught up in those cycles. But there is certainly no trend and no desire among any of the manufacturers to offshore everything. That is not happening certainly not happening in our sector. And it's not happening in very many sectors in the United States right now. I think we kind of learned our lesson on that just a little bit. So trying to bring as much as we can back to the United States.
As you start talking to folks about next year, it seems like most of the ones I talk to think that next year could be challenging too.
Yeah.
Do you also feel that way? And then what does that mean specifically, maybe on the equipment side?
Well, I mean, we don't predict the future, but I would say that there are some storm clouds out there. The storm clouds, I mean, we're still dealing without a farm bill.
Yeah.
We've got, you know, commodity prices that are fluctuating and not necessarily as positive we'd like for them to be. There's certainly some real uncertainties as it relates to the future of biofuels. And if you think specifically around the internal combustion engine and the reliance of ethanol for bolstering commodity prices, I mean, those are real issues that are out there. So there's lots of question marks that are going to probably lead to that uncertainty, and maybe even lead to some folks being just a little bit uncomfortable for the next year. But if you look into the future, when you look 5 years out, it's hard not to be incredibly optimistic about what agriculture holds, because of the innovation, because of the technology, and because of just those same global dynamics that are causing us some pain right now will continue to be positive trends that are going to make us look really excited about the future moving forward, because population growth is real. And when populations get bigger, and get wealthier, they tend to eat a little bit more protein. When they eat a little bit more protein, they eat a little bit more US corn and soybeans. So these are all good long-term trends, but we do have some short-term storm clouds that we're going to have to work our way through.
All right, so I don't want to end with Debbie Downer. So give us a positive trend you're seeing that is not getting enough headline.
Well, the one headline that is missed in some of those ones that are attention grabbing is the amount of investment that manufacturers and specific equipment manufacturers have made in U.S. production over the last 5 to 10 years is remarkable. We're talking billions and billions of investments in new plants and new production capabilities right here in the United States, right here in the Midwest, that are leading to good jobs, and taking things that might have been produced, a super high value piece of equipment that might have at one time was produced across a national border, now being brought here to the United States. But we do have labor challenges, so sometimes there's a trade-off. So you may instead of producing, something that doesn't require as much skill here in the United States, you export some of those lower skilled jobs in place for some of that high-end production that's happening here in the United States. So that's certainly one trend to point to. The other trend that I love to point to when we talk about equipment and equipment manufacturing and agriculture in general is this whole innovation space. We are just at the threshold of what data, artificial intelligence, and automation, autonomy, and GPS, all of the things that are coming with precision agriculture. We're just at the beginning of what that's going to mean for our agricultural life. But for those of us that are in the business for the long term, whether we're landowners or farm owners or just casual observers, man, it's a fun time to be in this world. You look at what we're going to be able to produce with the same acre of land using less inputs with just pure innovation. It's really pretty fun to pay attention to.
As we wrap up here, the kind of the overarching theme of all of our conversations here on the podcast come back to farmland. So you mentioned that you still get to go back home, back to Missouri. And what is it, as you're driving up there and you're pulling up and you see the land, like what's still now as an adult? I'm sure you have a ton of memories from when you were a little kid, but as you pull up to it now, like what do you think? What do you see? What are you feeling like right as you're pulling up there and you see it, especially this time of year when you're talking harvest?
Well, I mean, nothing gets your blood pumping like driving through the land that has been in my family's generation for years. I'm now proud landowner of some of that same trust. It's humbling, frankly, to look at that pride, to see the crops being grown on that same farm that my great grandparents were farming. It's humbling, but it also gives my life a little bit of purpose. It's fun to see what that land has become, and it's fun to see my kids have that same, even though they're not on the farm every day, to have that same sense of pride that I had. Boy, I think there's something pretty special that we have here in the Midwest, where we do have this land ownership, and it does become multi-generational. Really important that we keep that intact, because I know that my parents' legacy has been making sure that my generation can have that land intact, and my siblings and I's responsibility is to make sure that land is intact for the next generation, and hopefully that will continue for years to come.
We appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
You bet.
He is Kurt Blades, Senior Vice President of the American Association of Equipment Manufacturers. For more about AEM and upcoming conferences, you can check out our weekly newsletter. It's where landowners get their news, and you can find it at AmericanFarmlandowner.com. Sign up and get the newsletter emailed right to your inbox every week. Thanks for listening, and thanks for caring about the future of our farm.